Rain needles the windows while the house breathes like a sleeping animal, and you swear the heater died hours ago. Lightning freezes the room for a heartbeat, and in that white flash, the closet door is not where you left it. A metal clatter on the floor says someone else is awake. You hold your breath until your ribs ache, and realize the sound is not the storm at all. It is footsteps learning your floor by memory. Outside another life, a face drifts up the glass, a scar shining where no light should be. Time runs backward on a bedside clock while drawings you never made smile at a blue roof you do not own. Welcome to the channel where true stories do not ask for your permission before they move in. If you are new here, pull up a chair and subscribe, because tonight we are going to walk through 5 doors you thought were locked. Do not look away when the wrench drops. Do not blink when the window latch trembles. And if a friendly voice invites you to the back door, remember that some invitations are written in fear you have not felt yet. The rain had been hammering the roof since the afternoon, a constant hiss against the glass that made the whole world outside sound like an ocean. My parents had left earlier that evening for some kind of charity dinner, promising to be back before midnight. I was maybe 8 years old enough to think being home alone was exciting, not dangerous. When they called to say the storm was too bad to drive back, I remember pretending to be disappointed, even though a secret thrill ran through me. A night alone meant snacks, cartoons, and no bedtime. I didn't have my own television back then, so I spent the evening sprawled on the couch, the blue light of the screen painting the walls while thunder cracked above. My mom's list of rules echoed faintly in my head like every door. Close the blinds, keep one light on, but I decided I'd do all of that before bed. I didn't plan to sleep anyway. I don't remember drifting off. One second I was laughing at a commercial, and the next I was waking up in a silent room that felt colder than winter. The television had gone dark. The house had gone strange. You know the way a room feels different when you wake in the middle of the night, like it's been replaced with an imitation of itself? That's how it felt. The air was heavy, almost metallic. I rubbed my eyes, telling myself the chill was from the storm outside, but the cold had a weight to it, the kind that seeps from somewhere it shouldn't. Then I remembered my mom's voice. Lock all the doors. Close the blinds. I stood up, every floorboard creaking louder than I remembered. The living room clock said something close to 3. The rain sounded different too, not just heavy but rhythmic, like something was moving through it. I went to the front door first, twisting the lock until it clicked, then to the back door where the wind howled through the keyhole. I touched each window, checked each latch. Everything was sealed. Still, the cold stayed, crawling up my arms like invisible fingers. Satisfied enough to call it a night, I headed upstairs. My room was at the far end of the hallway, a little box with a big window that overlooked the backyard. As I climbed into bed, I realized I could hear the storm more clearly up there. The rain struck the glass with a desperate intensity, the thunder rolling so close it rattled the picture frames. Every time lightning flashed, the room glowed white, and then vanished again into total blackness. I wasn't scared of storms, not really, but something about the way the light flickered felt like a warning. I tried to fall back asleep, but the sound that woke me wasn't thunder. It was a slow, uneven creak, the kind you only hear in old houses when wood shifts under pressure. Except our house wasn't old. The floors were carpeted, and the sound wasn't under me, it was across from me. I sat up, holding my breath, waiting for another flash of lightning to give shape to the dark. When it came, I scanned the room and froze. The closet door was open, just a crack. It hadn't been opened before. I couldn't move. I stared at that black slit in the door, waiting for the next flash, praying I was wrong. Another bolt lit up the room. The door had moved. Open wider this time, maybe just an inch, but enough. My stomach twisted, and a kind of animal instinct took over. I didn't think, didn't scream, just slipped out of bed and tiptoed toward the hallway. The shadows seemed to follow me as I walked. That short stretch of carpet felt endless, every second stretching thin. Downstairs, the cold was worse. It crawled from the floor into my bones. I hid under the dining room table, knees pressed to my chest, and only then did I start to cry. I remember trying to make the sobs silent because I knew there was someone in the house. I don't know how long I stayed there before I heard the first step on the staircase, then another. But they weren't normal footsteps. They were clumsy, heavy, and fast, as if whoever it was half falling, half running down the stairs. I held my breath until I saw them. 2 bare feet, pale and slick with rain, stopped just beyond the edge of the tablecloth. The legs were scratched and streaked with mud, trembling slightly as if their owner could barely stand. They weren't moving toward me yet, just standing there, breathing. Then a metallic clink broke the silence. A wrench rolled out from one of the hands I couldn't see and clattered across the floor, stopping just inches from my face. The air in my chest turned to stone. If that person bent down to pick it up, they'd see me. The seconds that followed felt like an hour. The figure didn't move. The only sound was the rain outside and the slow, ragged breathing above me. Then the legs began to move again, shuffling across the tile, the wet footsteps circling the room. I watched as they disappeared toward the living room, the sound growing distant before a door hinge squealed. The front door slammed, and then there was nothing. I stayed under the table long after the footsteps stopped, too terrified to move. Eventually, when the silence became unbearable, I crawled out, picked up the wrench, and locked the front door again. The storm outside was beginning to fade, but the air inside still felt wrong. I didn't sleep. I just sat on the couch until the gray of dawn started bleeding through the blinds. When my parents came home later that morning, I told them everything was fine. I don't know why I lied. Maybe because the moment I said it out loud, it would become real. Years later, I told them what happened. They didn't believe me at first. My mom thought it was a dream. My dad said it was a nightmare mixed with a memory. But I can still feel that cold. I can still see those feet, hear that wrench spin across the floor. Even now, when storms roll in and the air pressure drops, I make sure every door is locked, every light is on, every closet door closed tight. It's not the thunder that scares me anymore. It's the silence that comes after. When you can hear every sound the house makes, and you start wondering which ones belong to you. It started as a dream, or at least that is what I told myself for years. I must have been around 9 when it first happened, old enough to understand what dreams were, but too young to realize how long one could last. The strange part wasn't what I saw, but how I saw it. Every time the dream began, I was floating above my bed, staring down at myself like a security camera stuck in the ceiling. I couldn't move my body, only drift in that silent space, watching. The only sound was the faint hum of my alarm clock, its red numbers counting backward instead of forward. In those early dreams, I would try to speak, to shout, to wake myself up, but nothing ever worked. After a while, I stopped fighting and just observed. That's when I began noticing the other details. Crayon drawings taped to the wall, childish figures holding hands in front of a blue-roofed house. I wasn't the type of kid who drew things, but there they were, as if someone else had decorated my room to look like mine. Every drawing had one smaller figure standing apart from the group. The little one never smiled. Then there was the toy train. I hadn't seen it since I was 4, yet there it sat every time, in a different place on the carpet. It was always the last thing I noticed before the feeling came the pull to look at the window. Even before I turned my gaze, I knew what I would see. A flash of gray hair, a face inches from the glass, eyes that didn't blink. There was always a cut across his left temple, a thin white scar that seemed to glow whenever lightning struck. He never knocked, never spoke. He just watched, and then his fingers would scrape against the window pane, slow and deliberate, as though he was trying to open it. That was the moment I always woke up. Sometimes I ran straight to the window to prove it wasn't real. Other times I lay frozen, too scared to move. There was never any evidence outside. No footprints, no smudges, nothing. When I finally told my parents, they said it was just a recurring nightmare. My mom blamed television. My dad said kids often dream about faces in windows. They both promised that they were just down the hall if I ever got scared. I nodded like that helped. The dreams stopped for months. I began to forget about them, until one random night when the dream returned exactly as before. The floating view, the drawings, the clock counting backward. But something was different. The window wasn't closed this time. I could see the curtains shifting in a breeze that didn't exist. The second I noticed that, I woke up for real, paralyzed. My eyes were open, my lungs screaming, but my body refused to move. The air was colder than I'd ever felt it, and I could swear the draft was coming from that very window. When I finally broke free, I jumped out of bed and checked the lock. It was shut tight, but the room still felt wrong. I stayed awake until sunrise, and even then the light didn't make me feel safe. I told my parents again, and this time, they actually listened. My dad took me outside, barefoot in the dew, to show me there were no footprints in the dirt beneath my window. I think he meant well, but seeing the empty ground somehow made me more afraid. An absence can be louder than a sound. Months passed before the dream returned. I thought I'd grown out of it, until one Sunday morning over breakfast, I asked my parents if they remembered anyone named Brian. My mother's spoon froze in her coffee cup and my father's eyes flicked up from his newspaper. I don't know why I asked. The name had just surfaced from nowhere. They looked at each other for a long moment before my dad cleared his throat and said that Brian used to babysit me when I was very little, too young to remember. He used to be a close friend of my dad's from college, almost like an uncle. I remember my dad's exact words when I asked why I didn't see him anymore. Because he's not supposed to, he said. That night, my parents sat me down and told me more. There had been some kind of falling out years ago. My dad didn't share details, only that Brian had done something terrible that ended their friendship permanently. They promised it had nothing to do with me. But the part that made my stomach twist was when my mom quietly added that Brian had a scar on his forehead from a car accident long before I was born. I didn't say anything, but the image of that scar from my dreams burned behind my eyelids. After that conversation, I couldn't stop thinking about the man in the window. I wondered if I had somehow seen him as a baby and buried the memory deep inside my brain. My dad said that's what he believed, that my dreams were just my mind's way of processing old fear. But even as a child, I knew that didn't explain everything. Why would the dreams return years later? Why did I feel cold air every time, like the window was really open? One night, in the 4th year of those dreams, I woke up to that same coldness. But this time I wasn't dreaming. My eyes drifted toward the window out of habit, and for the briefest second, I saw movement, something ducking out of sight. I screamed. My dad rushed in and ran outside barefoot again. I heard him shout before coming back in, his face pale, whispering something to my mom that I couldn't hear. They told me they had called the police, but I never heard sirens. The next day, my father admitted he had seen faint footprints beneath the window, but he said the rain probably made them look fresh. He swore it wasn't Brian. He swore Brian didn't know where we lived. I never had the dream again after that. Maybe it ended because the man outside finally left, or maybe because he finally got what he wanted. My parents refused to talk about it again, and as I grew older, I began to question my memory. But sometimes at night, when the wind shifts just right and I hear that soft scrape against the glass, I remember the feeling of being watched. I imagine that face on the other side of the window, scar and all, staring back in through the reflection. I like to tell myself that he's gone, that my father was right, that it was all just dreams and shadows. But some part of me knows better. Scars don't fade easily, not from skin and not from memory. The last day of 8th grade was supposed to be perfect. The kind of day where nothing bad could possibly happen. Everyone was signing yearbooks, running down hallways, shouting goodbyes that sounded more like promises. The building hummed with that unique kind of chaos that only happens when 1,000 teenagers taste freedom at the same time. I remember the smell of permanent markers and cheap perfume, the way the fluorescent lights flickered like they were celebrating too. When I finally got my yearbook back at the end of the day, I flipped through it eagerly, smiling at the notes from friends and inside jokes I barely remembered. Then my eyes landed on a page that didn't make sense. Under the photo of some random kid I didn't recognize was a signature written in looping, confident letters, Samuel Robinson III. Beneath his name was a short message. Hags, I'll be seeing you again. I froze. It wasn't just weird, it was wrong. I didn't know anyone named Samuel Robinson. The name didn't even sound familiar. I asked a few of my friends, but none of them had ever heard of him either. I figured maybe it was some kind of mix-up, like the yearbooks had gotten shuffled during the signing frenzy. Still, there was something about the message that unsettled me. I closed the book and decided to forget about it. That night, I hosted a sleepover in my basement with 3 of my friends, Kevin, David, and Kieran. We stayed up late, surrounded by soda cans and video game controllers, the glow from the TV flashing across our faces as we shouted over each other. It was the kind of night that made you forget the world outside existed. My parents were asleep, 3 floors up, too far away to hear us, which made us feel invincible. Around 2 in the morning, we were still laughing when a sharp knock echoed through the basement. It wasn't from the main door, but from the storm door, metallic and hollow. We all went silent at once. The knocks came again, not frantic, but steady, rhythmic, almost polite. We stared at each other, waiting for someone to move. Kieran, always the loud one, finally called out, asking who was there. His voice cracked halfway through the sentence. There was a pause, long enough for us to think maybe it was the wind. And then a voice answered. High-pitched, friendly, too cheerful for that hour. Come around to the back door, it said. The voice sounded young, maybe a teenager like us. I felt my stomach tighten. I told my friends not to open anything. Whoever it was, they shouldn't have known we were down there. There were no basement windows, no way to see inside. But now they did. The knocks stopped, and for a moment we convinced ourselves it was a prank. Then curiosity got the better of us. We crept upstairs, trying not to wake my parents, and peered through the narrow window beside the back door. Under the porch light stood a figure. The face was partially hidden in shadow, but when he stepped forward, my breath caught in my throat. I recognized him from the yearbook photo, Samuel Robinson III. He was smiling, just standing there in the rain, hands in the pockets of his jacket like he'd come over to borrow something. My friends whispered questions I didn't have answers for. I told them I knew who he was, that he'd signed my yearbook somehow. They thought it was funny at first until Samuel raised his hand and motioned for me to come outside. His movements were slow, deliberate, like he was inviting a friend to play. I cracked the kitchen window just enough to speak. The air that came through was sharp with rain and something sour underneath. "I saw your message," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He smiled wider. "Oh, so you got it," he said. "I told you we'd see each other again." His tone was light, almost teasing, but there was something off in his eyes, the kind of emptiness that doesn't belong to someone your age. I asked him how he knew where I lived. He didn't answer. He just tilted his head like the question confused him. Behind me, David whispered something under his breath, calling him a freak, a stalker. That's when Samuel's expression changed. It was instant. The smile collapsed, replaced by something raw and ugly. His breathing became heavy, his eyes darting between our faces. He started shouting, first random insults, then things he couldn't have possibly known. Private stuff. He screamed about my ex-girlfriend, about fights I'd had with my parents, about secrets I'd never told anyone. Every word made my skin crawl. He slammed his hands against the window, trying to force it open. I shoved it shut and locked it, my heart pounding so hard I could barely hear. His face twisted into something almost inhuman, spittle flying as he banged on the glass. My parents came running downstairs, startled by the noise. The moment the hallway light flicked on, Samuel bolted. My dad threw open the door and sprinted outside. But the yard was empty, except for muddy footprints leading into the street. We spent the rest of the night awake, waiting for sirens that never came. My parents decided to handle it through the school, instead of calling the police. I guess they didn't want to cause a scene. The next morning, they spoke with the principal, who looked horrified when they mentioned Samuel's name. He told them Samuel had been expelled weeks earlier for serious behavioral issues. The school refused to give details, but they said he hadn't been on campus since. That meant he must have snuck into the building just to sign my yearbook. Somehow, he found my picture, wrote his name, and tracked down where I lived. No one could figure out how. His records didn't list an address, and when the school tried to contact his parents, the number didn't work. They said the family had moved, but there was no forwarding information, no trace at all. For weeks, I kept expecting him to show up again. Every creak in the house, every car slowing down outside made me jump. My friends stopped coming over. The basement didn't feel like ours anymore. One night, unable to sleep, I opened my yearbook again. The page with his message was still there, but the ink had bled, as if water had touched it. The words, "I'll be seeing you again," had blurred into a single dark stain. I closed the book and shoved it in the back of my closet. Years later, I found it while packing for college. The ink had faded completely, leaving only a faint outline of his name. I stared at it for a long time, trying to remember his face, and realizing I couldn't anymore. Sometimes I wonder if he even existed, or if my mind filled in the blanks with something worse. But then I think about that night, about the sound of his voice saying he'd see me again, and I know I didn't imagine it. Some people disappear because they want to, others because they're made to. The terrifying part is not knowing which kind he was. Lindsay's family beach house sat on a quiet stretch of coast, where the nights were so still you could hear the tide breathe. 4 of us had driven down for a long weekend. That was supposed to be simple. We planned to read on the deck during the day, wander the shoreline at dusk, and fall asleep in a kid's room, with 2 sets of bunks and a bathroom that smelled faintly of salt and lemon cleaner. We made rules to keep ourselves in check. Stay together. Watch your drinks. Text the group when you split. On the first night, the rules felt like overkill, because nothing bad happens on a private beach surrounded by empty vacation homes, lit by soft amber porch lights. We took our drinks down to the sand and sat in a little circle with a speaker humming. The sky was ink thick and studded with stars. Half an hour later, a flicker appeared downshore, and our conversation thinned as we watched it swing left and right. Laughter carried on the wind as 3 silhouettes drew near, friendly and unthreatening. A trio of guys our age who greeted us like neighbors. We talked the way strangers do when the night is young and the ocean is kind. They were easy to be around. They were just careful enough to seem safe. I excused myself when my eyes began to droop. I told the others to enjoy themselves, and climbed the wooden stairs back to the house. I showered and fell into the lower bunk with the window cracked an inch. I woke to the phone vibrating near my ear and Lindsay's name filling the screen. Her voice hit me like cold water. She was shouting that Thea and Sabrina were gone and that I needed her car. She spoke in fragments that made no sense until they fit together like a bad dream. She had followed the guys to their place. She had gone back for her purse. She had seen them shove our friends into the back of a car. I ran. She stayed on the line, directed me past the gate and onto the road that paralleled the beach. The streets were empty, and the speedometer was a blur.
Still closed.
I called the police while Lindsay fed me a Macon color and the general direction of the taillights. I could feel her breath shaking through the speaker. When I finally spotted the vehicle, it was moving strangely slow. The dispatcher told me to hang back and keep it in sight. Those minutes stretched thin until red and blue light washed the pavement ahead. The car pulled over like it had nothing to fear. Officers yanked the doors wide and dragged 3 men into the street. A trunk popped and 2 figures sat there bound and breathing hard, hair matted to their faces, eyes blown wide as if the world had tilted and they were trying to stand straight on it. Parents were called. Statements were taken. The house the guys had claimed as theirs belonged to an elderly couple who had left for Europe and would return to a front door with a ruined lock. In the months that followed, there were hearings and doctors and sentences handed down in rooms that smelled like paper and stale coffee. I will not tell you I healed quickly. The girls did not either. We went home and started new rules that felt less like rules and more like instincts. Do not drink with strangers. Do not believe a friendly voice because it wears a human face. Stay together even when you are tired. You would think that story would have taught me everything. Months later on, a different shore, in a different state, I learned how a night can vanish without lifting a finger to fight. My best friend Jimmy ran events up and down the coast, and that weekend he had secured a venue that pulsed like a living thing. He brought me and our buddy Ryan early to pass through staff doors and pretend we had purpose. We drank more than we should have. That is not the part I regret. The part I regret is thinking I could tell the difference between an ordinary buzz and something that rewires your grip on time. We met 2 women by the bar who laughed easily and asked good questions. They were dressed like people who have never been cold. One bought us around and teased that we were lagging behind. I lifted the glass to be polite because they seemed generous rather than predatory, and because I still thought I could read danger in a sentence. The night moved forward in little jumps. We stepped outside, and the air pressed hands to my face. They suggested we go to a house nearby with a view of the ocean and floors so clean you could eat dinner off them. I had room keys in my pocket, but I let them lead because it felt easier to nod. I remember a beach house that looked like a gallery. I remember a hallway so long it ate our voices. Ryan walked out of the room with one of the women and looked back at me with a smile that said he was fine. The other leaned in toward me and heat moved up my neck like a tide. The scene cut there. No spin, no slow fade. The lights snapped off. When they snapped on, I was staring at leaves in a seam of noon sun. I was in clothes that were not mine. My shoes were wet and my mouth tasted like metal. My pockets were empty. No phone, no wallet, no keys. The word stolen flashed through my head, then the heavier word taken. A store across the road glowed like a lifeboat. The clerk stared for a second before handing me a phone. I called my sister, and then I called Ryan, and his number rang into nothing. For a moment, I saw 2 paths fork. Call the police and build a story I did not understand or start walking, and never stop. Ryan solved that problem by stumbling into the same store in different clothes with the same expression cut across his face. We did not talk. We pressed our foreheads together and laughed once in a way that sounded like choking. Then we went outside to meet the officers who had already begun to decide who we were. They listened and nodded and then backtracked toward the simplest explanation. Maybe you were drunk. Maybe you misplaced your phones. Maybe the worry makes the gap seem larger. They drove us to a nearby lot where both our phones lay side by side on the sun-warmed asphalt, uncracked and powered on. That discovery did not help our case. It convinced them we had lost things the way drunk people lose things. We scrolled our message threads and found texts sent from us to our friends and families that sounded like us and yet contradicted each other. We said we had a couch to crash on, and that we were home and that we were fine. It read like a cover story that someone had practiced writing in our voices. We encouraged the officers to check the house the women had mentioned. They shook their heads and told us to rest and to call if anything came back to us. After they left, we returned to the shore and walked the boardwalk until the right house appeared. An older man answered and told us he had no daughters, and no one by that name had ever slept under his roof. He laughed when I said a woman had pretended the house was hers. I did not laugh with him. The air in that doorway pressed on me like a heavy hand. Every time I remember the look inside that stranger house, the same sick thought rises. Someone drove us to that town. Someone exchanged our clothes and set our phones down like breadcrumbs for us to find. If robbery was the goal, nobody bothered to spend a cent with our cards. If harm was the goal, it was left unfinished like an abandoned project. I wish there was an ending that resolved neatly in a police report. There is not. Sometimes the worst part of what happens to you is the empty space where answers should be. I do not know what was in those glasses. I do not know why two people would stage a night around strangers for nothing. I only know that trust is a bridge that can collapse under the lightest step. That a person can live in your phone for hours without ever being in your life. That a beach house can glow like a lighthouse and still lead you into the deepest dark. Every story you just heard is a different doorway into the same place. It does not matter if it begins with rain or laughter or the bright noise of a crowded room. It always ends the same way, with the moment you realize you are no longer safe in a world you thought you understood. A house, a window, a classroom, a beach, a bar. Each of them started as ordinary spaces and turned into traps, because the human brain cannot accept danger until it has already stepped inside of it. The boy who hid under the dining table learned that silence can be the loudest warning. The child who dreamed of a man at his window learned that memories buried in the dark do not stay buried forever. The teenager who opened his yearbook to find a stranger's signature learned how easily curiosity becomes a target. The women at the beach learned that the word friendly can be as sharp as a knife. The men who woke up wearing other people's clothes learned that you do not always wake where you fell asleep. If there is a lesson buried under the fear, it is not just about locking your doors. It is about recognizing how fragile the line is between safety and exposure. We build our lives around assumptions that the walls will hold, that the people we meet mean well, that danger looks like something obvious. It rarely does. It hides in the pause between knocks on a door, in the quiet between songs at a party, in the way a stranger knows your name before you tell it. The stories you heard are true, not because of the facts, but because of the feeling, the sudden weight in your stomach when something small is wrong. Listen to that feeling. It is the oldest survival skill we have. If you ever find yourself alone in a storm, check the locks. If you ever wake from a dream that feels too real, write it down before it fades. If a friendly face appears where it shouldn't, trust distance more than politeness. Do not drink what you didn't pour, and do not chase voices into the dark. Most monsters do not live under the bed. They wait in plain sight, wearing ordinary shoes and familiar smiles. The world does not owe you a warning. You have to build your own. Thank you for watching, for listening, for making it this far through the storm. These stories are reminders, not nightmares. They teach us that fear can sharpen instead of break. If you are new here, welcome to the channel where true horror lives in the quiet places. Subscribe, stay close, and keep the lights on. Because when the night falls, every sound becomes a story, and one of them might be yours next.